Welcome to the Dylan Experience. Today is episode 59. I've got a very special guest, but before we get to that guest, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, whatever you got to do to follow the platform. My next guest is the host of a very special podcast that I've been on, Ordinary People with Extraordinary Stories. He is a local to the country of England, a husband, a father, son, a soldier, and an all-around good bloke. I'm happy to have Tim Heale on the podcast today. Tim, how are you?
Thanks for having me, Dylan. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So we did our podcast a couple of weeks ago, and we both were like, we need to continue this conversation because you got to hear my story. I didn't get to hear your story. So I'm kind of excited for this because there's so much I don't know about you. And yet we've been able to have great conversation. I love learning more about people. So why don't you start with your story? Tell me how Tim got to be Tim today.
Whoa. Start right back at the beginning. It must have been the 5th of April, 1958. I popped out into the world. First thing that happened to me, I was hung upside down by my feet and had my arse slapped. I'm thinking, this is a tad unfair. I've only just got here. Anyway, it's kind of been a bit of a struggle ever since then, really. I grew up in a pretty rough town in a place called Hatfield in Hertfordshire, which is just to the north of London. It was an overspill from the days of the war, where lots and lots of people were being moved out of London into the suburbs because they're trying to rebuild London and all the devastation from the Blitz and one thing and another. So that's where my parents came out of. My mother was born in Haringey in North London, and my old man came from Hackney. So almost in the sound of Bow Bells, but I was born just to the back of a place called de Havilland's. De Havilland's was a factory that used to build the Comet aircraft, and we lived in it wasn't even it was too small to be called a hamlet, but it was 2 cottages and a farm. So that's where I was born, and then we moved into a place called Welham Green, which is just outside Hatfield, and spent a couple of years there before we actually moved into Hatfield itself. And it was a pretty sort of rough area. I was taught how to fight before I could actually walk, so that's the sort of the area it was. So it was a bit rough and ready. The schools I went to, again, you needed to be about your wits and be able to handle yourself and one thing and another. And that's another little story. There was a bully in our class, and he hadn't picked on me yet. And when he did, I went to the old man for some advice. Probably not the best thing to do, but he said, "Well, son, best thing you do is thump the bully as hard as you can, because if you don't, he's going to give you a good hiding." So next day he starts on me. All anybody saw was me give him a thump, him go flying back into the school pond, and I get dragged off by the ear to the headmaster's office for 6 of the best. Well, I felt quite a bit of injustice in this. The only reasonable outcome was that the bully didn't pick on me ever again. He gave me a wide berth after that, but it did put the knockers on my education a bit. And a few years ago, I was diagnosed as having dyslexia, so that didn't help my schooling. When I got up into secondary school, we tended to up the wag more than we went into school. So we used to go in the morning, tick off on the register and clear off. Again, that didn't do me any favours whatsoever. My life changed at the age of about 11. Up until about 11, I was going to be a farmer, same as my granddad and my uncle. We used to go down on the farm. It was a pig farm, and I wanted to be a pigman. In school, we took what we call the 11 plus, and this determines whether you go to a grammar school and get a proper education, or you go to a rather large comprehensive school that's as rough as you like. And so I failed the 11 plus fairly miserably and ended up in a big comprehensive school. Wasn't too bad. I mean, there was a few classes that we did go into. I mean, I was quite into the sport, and I loved playing rugby, and we were able to play rugby at the school. And yeah, I managed to scrape through. And then the first time I was about 14 3/4. It was the first time you could apply to go and join the army. So after I couldn't get into the agricultural school, I was going to join the army. So I was down there by myself, got really confused with this form that you had to fill out. And this recruiting sergeant, he says to me, you know, one of the only recruiting sergeants I ever came across that never lied. He said, son, if you can't read and write proper, you can't join the army. So you want to get a grip of yourself and get yourself a bit of an education so you can read and write and then come back. Well, that weekend I was devastated. I took a long, hard look at myself, and I thought, well, I'm going to do something about this, else I'm going to end up in prison like some of these other toe rags that have gone before me. So, so that Monday, I turned over a new leaf. I didn't up the wag like the rest of the lads. I said, no, I've got to do something. I've got to pick myself up. I need a bit able to read and write. So the funny part about it, I spent that week, I went to every class that I'd never been to, and all the teachers thought I was a new student coming from somewhere else. So I worked my socks off for about 6 months, and then went back to the recruiting office, about 15 and a half. And a mate of mine came with me. We're going to join the army together. And we sat there, and the recruiting sergeant recognised me. He says, how you doing? I said, well, I'm going to do a little bit better than the last time. He said, well, all right, here's the test, lads. I'll be back in shortly. So we sat there. My mate gave us half the answers, and I managed to secure a place as a junior soldier in the Royal Anglia Regiment, and never looked back. So on the 5th of August 1974, I turns up at the depot, the Queen's Division, as a junior soldier in the Royal Anglian Regiment. And yeah, from there on, life started to get a little bit better for me. But it was a long, hard struggle. And so people say when they went through training, it was tough. They know nothing. Yeah. If you stepped out of line, you got a two choice. Do you want to go on OC's orders, or do you want to have my punishment? All over your punishment, Sergeant. Took you around the back and thump, you got a thump. And that was it. Job done, over with. And he came away, I mean, with half a decent wage at the end of the training period.
So I have a question. When it comes to like that moment in your life where, you know, you failed that test, and this recruiter told you, you know, you're not going to join the army with this kind of score. You know, clearly, like a moment like that is really transformational, because it can be that moment where you either step down and say, you know what, I got nothing left to live for. But clearly, like so much of your own mindset throughout your childhood, I imagine, kind of emphasized that. Were you kind of thinking this was the only thing that I was good for, you know, at the time? Like what was your decision making of, you know, those few days after? What kind of pushed you to step into something that you absolutely hate, right? Going to school, you know, now you know that there's this dyslexia, you know, compartment in there. And so it's not something that was native to you, but you still did it. So what kind of pushed you in that moment to make that choice?
Well, I'm one of these people that my glass is always half full. So, and I look at a problem, and I look for a solution. And I'd already failed getting into agricultural school, so I failed the 11 plus. So that scrapped me from going to a grammar school to get a decent education. The comprehensive system is like, it's all right, but they stream you. And I was right in the bottom stream. I mean, because I came through the junior school as struggling, it got even worse because, I mean, I mugged school off most of the time. I could barely read and write at the time. And where I went to take the test to go and it was an agricultural school, but it was a boarding school. So you was a boarder, you lived in, you spent your days doing your academic studies, and you spent a lot of time doing farming studies. So it would be looking at crop rotations, looking at animal husbandry, that sort of thing that this college set you up for to go on to being a professional farmer. So I failed the test to get into there, and I thought, well, yeah, I'm in the army, it'll take me. At the time, I mean, most people, you had a choice whether you went in the army or you went to jail from where I was.
Yeah.
So, and when the recruiter said, I mean, unless I can do better on the test, I can't join the army. And I thought, well, I don't want to go to prison because I've seen some of the Irks that come out of prison, and I don't want to go down that road. So, being R4, I thought, well, do something about it. It's like worrying. I've never been a worrier. There's no point in worrying, because if you can't do anything about something, it's pointless worrying about it. If you can do something about it, then do something about it. Don't worry about it. And I've always kind of had that sort of philosophy. Just get on and get the job done. So, yeah, looking at myself and saying I need to do something else, I'm not going to make it, just was to spur me on.
Do you think that mindset was taught to you, or was that something that like was kind of intrinsically you? Like, was it kind of a product of your environment? Was it someone taught you that way? Like, what do you think? How do you think you gained this? Because that's somewhat rare nowadays, I think, where worry is more rife. It's more, it's more
people.
It's more readily available, obviously, and not everybody can look at that with that perspective and say, I can't do anything about this. Let it go. Move on. Like it's not that simple for some people. Where do you think you kind of gain that ability?
I don't know. It's when I was growing up, I mean, as a kid, I was never indoors, never at home. My mother never knew where I was. I was always off out with my mate somewhere doing something. The only time they ever saw me is if a copper brought me home. And we got caught several times scrumping. We soon learned a lesson then out not to get caught.
What is excuse the language.
Scrumping.
Yeah, what is that?
Scrumping is somebody's orchard that doesn't belong to you.
Sure.
And they're growing apples and stuff like that. Well, you go in and borrow a few apples.
Borrow a few.
We'll
give them back.
Intended on giving them back, but
I get it.
Yeah. So that's called scrumping.
Sure.
So you go and nick a few apples off a tree, but it's like somebody sets up a trout farm, and then you go and borrow a few fish just to see what they're like before committing to going and paying the money and fishing.
Oh, that's great. I mean, it's such a, I think, I didn't grow up like in that rough of an environment, but I grew up in a similar environment in terms of I was outside. I grew up from 6 years old on. My story kind of started into a horse ranch type thing where we had about 6 acres of land. There's a fairly 2-acre forest or so that I was able to kind of spend a lot of my time in because I didn't want to be around the house. So my parent, my mom and, her boyfriend knew where I was. And I had some friends nearby, but I think that outdoors, like being outdoors and forcing yourself to sit outdoors, right, is something that maybe that's where it comes from, because we both think very similarly
Mm.
in that, retrospectively. That was just a time where you looked around and there was nobody that was going to help you if something happened. And certainly things happened, right? Like I imagine we both got into situations where we were like, uh-oh, like this is questionable,
Yeah.
whether this is, safe or not. But I think nature maybe has that effect on people, where if you really put yourself in nature to a point where you have to use caution and you have to use it, I think, wisely, because to do certain things you have to be able to risk certain things, but also you have to be as cautious as possible, and recognize that if you worry about things, or if you
Mm.
place emphasis on overthinking things, then opportunities will not be available to you anymore. Um,
Well, as for caution, I don't think we had any of that when I was growing up. I mean, God, I was to be honest, I was lucky to survive childhood. I mean, we used to go and play on bomb sites. I don't know whether you ever had prefabs in America, but after the war, they set up temporary housing. They called it temporary housing. I mean, they were asbestos built, sort of moduled
sure.
trailer parks, for want of
Yeah,
another word, and they were knocking one of these down. So we as kids went and helped.
of course.
I mean, when the workmen finished on on the Friday afternoon, we'd be in there all weekend smashing things up, having a great time. And so we thought we was helping.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
how we survived, some of us, childhood, and then Saturday morning used to get £0.50 pocket money. I don't know what that is in American dollars or whatever, but used to get £0.50 pocket money, and we first thing used to do is club together with your mates, go down to the local shop, and one of us would go in with a note from his mum saying, "Can I have 20 fags?" which is cigarettes, by the
Hmm.
way. Not 20 gay blokes or whatever you have in America. So 20 cigarettes, and we'd be down the back alleys smoking away at sort of the age of about 10, on our way down to what we call Saturday morning pictures. So Saturday morning pictures was another great lark that we used to have as kids in the 60s, and when we were growing up. And it was you go to the movies on the Saturday morning, and it's just for kids. So one of us would go in and pay a sort of sixpence to get into the pictures, and as soon as he got in, shot down to the back to the where the toilets were, and opened the window, and half a dozen of us would climb in. so so we were saving it. Sort of pocket money to go and spend on fags and booze at the age of about 10.
Oh my God.
We had some fun. And a Saturday morning picture, so you'd have a couple of cartoons, you'd have the main feature, and it'd be either a western or a war film or a comedy or something like that. And when you come out of pictures, all the kids are sort of reenacting
Yeah,
the film that they've just seen. So we're either playing cowboys or we're playing war or whatever on the
right.
way home.
How
Yeah, so
interesting.
growing up in the 60s was an experience, and
Right.
I feel sorry for kids nowadays. They don't get that sort of opportunity
Yeah.
to live the way that we did back then.
Yeah. It's not the same. Certainly,
Mm.
my son's 10, he's that age, and, he has such a massively different perspective on, tobacco and
Yeah,
alcohol. And that's probably not a bad thing. Right.
well,
But
yeah,
at the same time, like there's a markedly different uh, mindset difference there as
yeah,
well. And so like the risk aversion to children nowadays is quite a bit different. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I think we'll find out, in 10,
yeah,
20,
years to
30,
come.
40 years, we'll see. But there is something to be said for the mindset that you built at that age. Was in many ways well, you're here, right? Like you're
Yeah,
here, and you're in a place where I imagine that you're quite happy with yourself doing your own thing.
yeah.
And that's a good thing. And so that's something we can learn from. But
Well, I'm certainly comfortable with me.
yeah,
And if I can turn up at the pearly gates and I can say to old Peter, well, Pete, I've had a great life. It's been tremendous, and it's one of my own choosing, and I'm dying an happy man. Can I come in? And he'll probably say, you must be joking. Hop it. That's the way I see it going
you're a
anyway.
savage, Tim. You're not allowed here.
Yeah, you ain't getting your wings here, mate. Hop it.
Don't worry. I'll
Yeah,
probably join you wherever you go.
yeah. I mean, I've had a great life so far. I mean, it has been blessed, I must admit. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've had some pretty rough times in my life. I've been in some pretty dodgy situations, and I've nearly lost my life on more than a dozen occasions.
I imagine a few of those are probably army related.
Most of them are, actually.
Do you want to talk about those? I would love to kind of hear about, like you know me, I'm US military,
Yeah, yeah.
and I'm US military now, modern age. So I'm always curious. Like when you told me you live by the de Havilland factory, like I grew up learning about that. Like I when you said de Havilland, I was like, was he talking about the mosquito? Was he talking about the comet? Was he talking about, like,
Yeah.
the different, I love kind of learning about that World War II history, and, even World War I, World War II, into the Korean age and Vietnam, like for us, obviously, but like, I would love to learn, more about the history of your progression through the military, what it was like for you, what happened, obviously, in your life, and what were the circumstances of these tragic and traumatic situations, I imagine. I'd love to hear more of that.
Well, as a young lad at 17, we passed out of training, having done sort of best part of 9 months in training. It was. I got posted to my battalion, which was the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Anglia Regiment. And at that time, the battalion was in Munster in West Germany. When we arrived at the battalion was actually away on a tour of Northern Ireland. They were in Belfast. So being 17, we couldn't go. So we got jiffed and we were stuck on rear party. So we got to kind of bed into the battalion before the battalion sort of came back, and the battalion came back just before Christmas. And those of us that were on the rear party, we were jiffed with Christmas duties. So Christmas Day, 1975, I was on guard.
Yeah.
New Year's Eve, we got the guard off, and we had a great party. And then the battalion came back, and then we got posted back to England in the middle of 1976. And then in 1977, the battalion went back to Belfast, and I was in A Company at the time. And all through the training, we'd practiced our patrol moves, because we went out in 4-man bricks with a 12-man patrol. So a 12-man patrol would go out, 3 bricks of 4. So we operated one team on the ground, giving cover, well, scheme and maneuver, basically.
Yeah.
We were patrolling this. We've been out there for a couple of months. During training, we practiced. I was always in our 4-man brick. I was the front right man. My mate Alan, who was the team boss, was on the front left. I had a guy called Chris behind me, and he had Terry behind him. We're coming down out of the Mooryard into Spring Hill Avenue in the Ballymurphy in West Belfast. And we came round the top of this street, and he said, change. thought, what? Swap sides. We hadn't done this since we got there. We did it in training, but for this bizarre reason, 2 months in, he said change. So we swapped sides. We'd only got, I don't know, 70, 100 meters down the road, and there was crack. There was 2 rounds came at us. I bang, bang. I fired 2 rounds back, took some cover. As I looked over, the boss, Alan, has fallen to the ground. He'd just been shot. And I got over to him, dragged him into cover, and he's sending a contact report. And I can remember clear as day. He said, "Hello, 1, this is 13 Bravo, contact Spring Hill Avenue, send Starlight, I've been shot in the arse, out." That threw a little bit of confusion. I got into a state, we're trying to find out where the exit wound is and everything, and there's just a little hole in the back of his pants, where in his butt, but the round had actually come in, gone through his groin and straight out. The other round had gone into somebody's kitchen. The street is starting to fill up. The initial follow-up we did down the road where the shot had come from. With his contact report, we thought it'd come behind us. Anyway, the other troops, the ambulance, we have a special type of ambulance. It's called a Saracen, which is an armored ambulance. Came in. It was the first thing to get to us. Then the rest of the patrol came in. We got him away. We started to do the follow-up. We recovered the weapon, and also saw that where my second round had gone, it must have gone past this bloke's ear because he'd left the weapon behind and scarpered. But the second round had hit the church and taken out a stained glass window of a church in the Ballymurphy. So that was one of the sort of defining moments of it could have been me, and it wasn't. But to this day, I still don't know, and he can't remember saying why he changed or anything like that. So, well, that was one of the first tough incidents we had to deal with, because we then had to at a patrol. Then we had to get a new person into our brick to finish off the rest of the tour. A few days later, I got blown up myself with another lad. He took most of the blast, and I ended up landing on my head and getting a big gash on my head. But I was left out in the streets for about another 6 hours while we were trying to mop up this incident, because we'd originally got called out to a riot up on a place called Kelly's Corner, which is the corner of Springfield Road and the White Rock Road, and there's a post office up there. So there's a big demonstration going on outside of this. We got crashed out because we was on the QRF, Quick Reaction Force.
Yep.
As we got up there, they started kicking off, throwing a few stones at us and one thing and another. So we sort of ducked round the back of some houses to go over a fence to come back out from a different direction. And as we were going over this fence, there was a command det that blew me and a guy called Paddy up. He took most of the blast. They dragged him off to hospital. We had 175 stitches up of his back and his back of his legs and stuff. And I got away with being my ears ringing. I couldn't hear anything for a few days, and a bang on my head. But I was left out on the street. That was quite difficult to deal with. And then we also, out on patrol one night, we found a guy that had been beaten up, kneecapped, and left for dead. So it was a pretty rough tour. I mean, we had lots and lots of incidents every day. I stopped half house brick with my head. That hurt. Because we were going around in soft hats at the time. We could either go out with flak jackets on, or if we didn't want to wear them, we didn't have to. Depends on the sort of patrol we were going out on, whether we used the flat jackets or not. We were also on a search team at that time. So our deck was a search team. So we went in to do some searches, and we found a few weapon systems and ammunition stuff. And there was one particular house that we searched, and it was minging, absolutely heaving. It was honking. I can't tell you some of the stuff that we found in this house. But when we came back in off of that, we had to have all our kit strip searched. We had to, or stripped off. That was burnt. We were deloused. Oh, it was horrific. I did get a new set of kit out of it. Stuff I was wearing was almost worn out. So that was a pretty tough tour. When we got back the following year, we got posted to Berlin. And Berlin was the best posting the battalion's probably ever had, even to this day. I mean, Berlin in 1978 to 1980 was an awesome place to be. And we had such, I mean, the best duty that you could get was the British military train. And I mean, it was a long day, but it was such a fun duty to do. I mean, it's a little bit boring at times because you're on the rattler, but when you got into the station, the guys that were on duty, it was a bit of pomp and circumstance to go and get the passports checked and one thing and another. But the train itself was like the Orient Express. It was opulent. It was, everybody was sort of dressed smart and laid on some fantastic grub. And it was just as you was getting into these two stations that you were getting a decent grub. So the poor old East Germans that were patrolling up and down the train were looking in. I don't know what they must have thought about what we were doing, but it was a fun duty. The other fun duty was flag tours that took us over into East Berlin. Now, if you've ever seen the old black and white films of something like the 39 Steps or Harry Lime, then going from West Berlin, which was really colourful, opulent and flashy, into East Berlin through Checkpoint Charlie, it was literally going from a colour film to a black and white film. Wow. Everything in East Berlin was grey. People were grey. Everything was grey. I mean, it was a bizarre sense when you went into East Berlin. But we used to go for in a big Opel Imperial, like a big limousine type, just four of us in our best uniforms. And when you come get through Checkpoint Charlie into East Berlin, you'd pick up a tail, and you either had a Russian tail that followed you around or an East German tail that followed you around. And the Americans went over, the French went over, and it's just showing the flag basically. And there was a few places that you had to visit. The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, which was a Russian one. There was a few cafes that we went to. There was a museum. There was a Russian museum in East Berlin. So it was quite good fun. And our life expectancy in Berlin at the time was probably about 6 hours. If the Russians decided that they're coming. Where we lived in a place just the other side of Claddow, our barracks was Montgomery Barracks, and just where my quarter was, because I was married at the time, was about 100 meters from my front door was the wall, the back wall. Oh. And just the other side of the wall was a big Russian camp. I mean, you could hear the tanks rattling around on this camp all the time.
So you guys probably weren't on the high end of that 6 hour life expectancy. If they were,
we're probably at the bottom end of it.
Yeah.
But I mean, living that life in Berlin, you never gave it a second thought.
Right.
I mean, it was more about having fun than anything else. Berlin. I mean, probably one of the probably one of the funniest duties, or one of the difficult duties, was guarding Spandau prison. Rudolf Hess was still alive, and he was a funny bugger because he's got his whole almost prison all to himself. He's kind of the only prisoner in there, and it rotates. The guard rotates, so you've got the Russians in there, you've got the Americans, got us, and got the French, and we take turns of a month at a time to guard Hess, and it basically, for a grunt, is standing on a Sanga, and the briefing is you're not allowed to look inside the prison, especially when he's out doing his bit of exercise, and if you're seen looking at him, then what happens is you get into trouble. You couldn't make it up. So Berlin was awesome. And then from Berlin, we got posted back to Northern Ireland, and we were a resident battalion up in Londonderry. So we spent 2 years up there, and that had its moments. That was during the Falklands War. So the Falklands War kicked off, and that was, we had a bit of a hard time because the IRA wasn't in the news at the time, and it was all the British Army doing this, and the Marines. Yeah, so we got a bit of a hard time out of it, but we dealt with it and moved on. So yeah, that was difficult times as well.
When you were obviously in Northern Ireland, that's, for I imagine a lot of my listeners, they don't know a lot of the history about how, what it was like in Belfast at the time. It's a war zone.
I can give you a quick synopsis of what it was all about.
Yeah.
Back in 1969, thereabouts, 68, 69, the Protestants in Northern Ireland were giving the Catholics an awful hard time. The police were struggling at coping. The British Army were called in to aid the civil power. So we went in 68, 69 to help the police control the situation. So we went in initially to protect the Catholics from the Protestants. Then it all started going P-tong, and the Catholics started picking on us.
Right.
Back in the I think it was about the 1920s, the British pulled out, or the British split Ireland, and we took the 6 counties in the north and left Southern Ireland for the Irish. Whether it was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do at the time, I don't know. I wasn't there. I was elsewhere at the time. But
obviously.
But as time went on, you got the groups like the IRA, the Nationalists, and so forth, then turning the tables and picking on the British Army. And we were in there for the best part of 30 odd years. There are positives to take out of this. The positives is that Northern Ireland was a fantastic training ground for live operations. So it made the British soldier really good at what we do. And that's probably one of the best things that we can take out of that conflict in Northern Ireland. Mm-hmm. At the moment, I don't know whether you've seen much on the news, but recently we've just had local elections, and the Sinn Féin, which is the political arm of the IRA, have now got control of Northern Ireland in Stormont, in the Parliament, or the devolved administration in Northern Ireland. So the worry at the moment is that Northern Ireland, because of certain things that have been put into the Northern Ireland Protocol and the Northern Ireland peace process, they can now have a referendum whether to reunite Ireland or not.
Yeah. And that's its own kind of political.
That's its own problem. I mean, since I mean, that throws up a whole raft of other stuff.
Yeah.
Since the UK voted to leave the European Union have been using every trick they can to punish us for leaving it. And that's, I mean, why we haven't told them to stuff it and go WTO rules on trade, I don't know. Why we haven't scrapped Article 16, why we haven't torn up the Northern Ireland Protocol, I don't know. For some reason, the government just seem to, they must be masochists, because the EU continually beat us. I mean, they're like whipping boys. They're just continually beating us and punishing us for voting to leave the European Union. We haven't voted to leave Europe. I mean, we're still part of Europe. We're kind of Europeans, but we don't want to be dictated to by unelected bureaucrats. And that's why the vast majority of people voted to leave the European Union. Get off
I'm sure.
soapbox.
Yeah, I mean, it's to me, it's I somewhat understand the situation, but it's just so far outside of my scope of you know, I'm American, obviously, and so that's where I kind of focus my understanding. We have our own problems, obviously. Everybody has their own problems, and we've all got to figure them out at some point, or we won't, and we'll figure that out. But no, it's, you know, I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of background in terms of, you know, when you're walking into Northern Ireland, you know, you're not walking into, you know, some potato farming communities. Like, you're walking into semi-war zone type areas.
Well, it's a guerrilla war. Yeah. Basically, it was a guerrilla war. You didn't know who your enemy were. Right. You never saw them. They were cowards. Basically, it was a bunch of terrorists conducting a guerrilla operation. Much the same as what's unfolding at the moment in the Ukraine. Ukrainians are giving the Russians something of a bloody nose. The Russians got the same treatment when they were in Afghanistan in the 70s.
So did we.
Yeah. I mean, well, we kind of did, we didn't. I mean, for us, it was a different barrel of monkeys altogether.
Yeah.
The Taliban were,
I think
just,
by the start,
this last week, the Taliban have now really mugged off the women in Afghanistan, right, and forcing them back into the burqa.
Right.
And we're to turn that around. And I really, really feel passionately sorry for the young women and girls in Afghanistan, because they've had 20 years where they've been able to go to school, they've been able to get half a decent education, and they've been able to learn. And now that's been taken away from them. And you can't imagine how they must be feeling.
Yeah.
And the worst of it is we can't do anything about it at the moment. There's no political will to go back into Afghanistan and sort that problem out. And unfortunately, there's going to be generations of girls that are going to be suppressed as they were before. And it just beggars belief that they're getting away with it. Yeah. But there you go. That's another fight for another day, I guess.
Right.
But my time in Afghanistan, I had an awesome time. I did 3 tours of Afghanistan and loved every one of them.
When were you in Afghanistan?
I was in Macedonia in 2001 when 9/11 happened, and I know exactly where I was. I was sat outside Camp Able Sentry. We called it Anal Entry. The guys was inside doing a little bit of shopping in the PX. I was sat outside in the car listening to the radio, and it came over that there was something kicked off in New York. Grabbed the guys, we shot back to our camp, which is to the shoe factory in Skopje. As we got into the ops room, we got some big tellies up and one thing and another, and we stood there and we just watched that second plane going to the Twin Towers, and there were some Americans on the operation with us, and they wanted to nuke the rest of the world. It was pretty scary, some of the stuff that they came out with. Anyway, 5 months later, I found myself in Kabul.
Yep. Oh.
freezing my nuts off.
Yep.
So the back end of January 2002, I was in Kabul, and I was there until the 20th of June when we handed over to the Turks.
So
where over ISAF?
Where were you? So you were in, like, was that when ISAF headquarters was kind of centralized in, like?
In the university building, just behind the, I think it was a police academy, the military academy, but just next to where we were.
Was the military academy? So I was in Afghanistan, or I was in Kabul twice, right, in 2012 and 2019, and it's changed so much even between those years. But
it's not the one out on the Jalalabad road. It's the one just around the corner from the American embassy.
Oh,
so
sure.
You come past the American embassy, down the road you've got radio, television, Afghanistan on the right, and then over on the left you've got what used to be the university building, which was the ISAF headquarters at the time. And we had a setup there. And I was in psychological operations, and we were responsible for setting up the ISAF News. So it was a tri-language newspaper in English, Pashto and Dari, mainly good news stories going out to the locals. And I spent a lot of time on the ground speaking to locals, getting stories. I interviewed Ashraf Ghani, Hamid Karzai, the Minister of the Hajj, and a few other leaders for the newspaper. And it was a success. And we handed that over to the Turks, thinking that that'll go by the wayside. When I got back to Afghanistan in late 2005, early 2006, the newspaper had evolved a little bit. It was now in colour. It was now a tabloid size, and it was going across the country.
Wow.
And I saw copies of it in 2006 down in Helmand province.
Well, good job to the Turks, right? Like that usually doesn't happen.
They run with it. I mean, a really, really funny story. In warehouse camp, which was on the Jalalabad road, just before you've got Camp Suta over. If you turn off left, just along there, you've got the brick Camp Suta, it was called at the time. Just a bit further along the Jalalabad road, you've got warehouse camp, where the kind of the Turks, the Germans were in there mainly at the time, and a few other the other nations. And the Germans Ops Info Battalion, which is their Psyops guys, invited when the Turks were coming in, getting ready to take over. So they came in quite early, and we had Turkish Psyops operators, I guess, using the term fairly loosely, come in, and we were handing over to them. We gave them loads of kit and all the rest of it. But the Germans decided to lay on a big barbecue for us all. You can see where this one's going. So we turned up with the Turks for this barbecue, and then we got a few near beers, which is pretty disgusting stuff. But this barbecue was great. It's pork steaks, sausages. The Turks just had the salad. You couldn't make it up. I mean, talk about insensitive. But there you go. That's the Germans for you. But it was great fun. We had a really good time in Kabul. I had a pretty good time down in Helmand. It was pretty back in 2006 when we got down there. It was late 2005, early 2006 when we went back into Afghanistan, and we took over Helmand province in the south there. And the Taliban were a bit stupid at the time. They thought that it was a shooting war, and went out on patrol. I was out on patrol with some guys. We got dropped off by helicopter, and I was carrying my patrol kit, weighed 42 kilos, mainly made up of ammunition and water.
That's about 90 pounds for the Americans listening to this.
Yeah, and
maybe a little bit more.
And I'm wondering why my knees are giving me trouble now.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we got dropped off by a helicopter. I've got some work to do in this particular village that we were working with. We had a bit of a shura with the leaders, and when we were extracting out of the village, our comms had gone down. Next thing that happened was we got opened up on by the Taliban. It was roughly about 9 hours later. We'd cover about a mile and a half, and we managed to finally get comms in, get some fast air in. It dropped a couple of 500-pounders on these buggers, but they were like falling plates. I mean, the AK-47 is not an accurate weapon. How we didn't get anybody shot that day is a miracle. But we estimated we dropped on about 30 Taliban, and they were still coming at us.
Yeah.
But I mean, we managed to get this concept called in some fast air, and the helicopter came back and picked us up. But yeah, it was a tough day.
Yeah,
I didn't have an awful lot of weight carrying when I got back.
Right.
I was almost down to my last magazine of ammunition. We were almost down to the last round per man, like thinking it's going to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
But,
I mean,
that was a pretty hectic day, I must admit.
Right.
And then when I went back in 2008-9, it changed to IEDs mainly.
Yeah.
And I went out on 4 patrols on that. Although I spent my whole time bouncing around the whole of Helmand, putting in a radio network, a commercial radio network, a radio in a box,
sure,
which is a 50-watt transmitter, FM transmitter, with a media box on, and we were playing music and sending out psychological operations messages and stuff like that, public information. So I spent my whole time going around doing that. But on 4 occasions, I actually had to go out and help out a shura or something like that. That was going into a particular village. Twice we got hit by IEDs, and guys lost their lives, and a couple of guys lost some limbs. So that was pretty tough. And the word from the command was that if you don't need to go on the ground, don't get involved in military tourism.
Right.
Leave it to the professionals to go out and do the job properly. Don't get caught going out to see what it's like. And then and I guess there was like a lot of Americans that go into a war zone.
Mm-hmm.
People never left Bastion.
Yep.
You fly into Bastion, you do your 6-month tour, you fly back out of Bastion. You never get to see the country. I, on the other hand, was really fortunate that I was able to get around a lot of the country. I was in the south in Garmasia. I was in the north at Kajaki. I was at the dam in Kajaki. I was in Sangin. Spent quite a lot of time in the Sangin Valley in different patrol bases.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I've seen a lot of Afghanistan, met a lot of locals, and yeah, great respect for Afghans. I mean, they are they are nice, hospitable people, and it's just a shame that what's going on with them. But there you go. It's one of these things that unfortunately the world's full of it.
Yeah, I spent most of my time, pretty much all my time in Kabul for the most part. I was also in the Kunar River Valley, just north of Jbad. I spent some time at Jbad, but not just, transporting through. But most of my time was in Kabul. It was, I have the same kind of perspective on it. The people that I met were all incredibly kind, incredibly grateful, incredibly open to having us there. Obviously, we didn't meet the other half of the people that didn't agree with it. But especially Kabul was that kind of bastion of forward thinking, progressive thinking. And so there were a lot more people in Kabul that thought the way that we did. They gave us that respect of, we want this.
Well, Kabul was under the Shah back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, was trying to bring Afghanistan into the 21st century. He was forward thinking. It was a cosmopolitan area. You look back at the films at the time and research what it was like at the time. People going around in Western clothes. The university was popular. Women were allowed there, wearing Western dress. Then the Russians were invited in to help with the infrastructure in the country. So a lot of the stuff that you see, the infrastructure that's built in Afghanistan was built by the Russians. The problem that the Russians made was they tried to have too much influence in the country, and there were factions that were fighting against that, which then kicked off wanting to get rid of the Russians. So the Mujahideen then started on the Russians, and that was a pretty much a guerrilla war, and nobody has ever won against the Afghans. And go right back to Alexander the Great. Even he didn't manage it. So
it's just
but they are a proud people, and a lot of respect for them.
Well, it's unforgiving country, right? Like when
it's harsh on the body,
right?
It's harsh on equipment. It's harsh on everything.
Yeah, when you step into Afghanistan and you realize what you're facing for the first time, it is, you walk into it. Like, for me, I was young, and supremely ignorant, right? And even with that, there were still parts of me where I was like, what, don't overestimate your capacity for, doing this job and your ability. Like, be humble. But when you get there and you see the mountains for the first time, and you see, and you start thinking about the task that's placed upon you, of like, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what our country is trying to do. You start to realize that there's a reason these people, are not necessarily winning, but we're not beating them, right? Like, there's still resistance here. There's a reason, because they've lived in this country for millennia,
centuries,
and you look at it and you're like, you look at these mountains, you're like, wow, like, this is absolutely insane. Like, there's nothing easy about, like you said, there's nothing easy about it on people. There's nothing easy about it on equipment. There's nothing easy about it in terms of logistics and planning. Nothing is easy. And so the people that have lived in Afghanistan for the millennia that they lived there, they did so through grit and tenacity, and it's become a piece of their culture. And if you don't respect that, like, that's obviously why Alexander the Great didn't make it. The British obviously didn't make it out of there.
Well, the first couple of times we were in there,
Right.
we certainly didn't appreciate it.
Right.
I think we did the last time we were in there.
The Russians and even us, right? Like NATO and ISAF forces, we didn't walk away from that unscathed. And obviously there's, you know, it's just it's a tough place to approach having a conflict of any sorts there. And it is hard to see, you know, the people of Afghanistan facing what they're facing now. But, you know, we've got our own problems. You guys got your own problems. Afghanistan has its own problems. And I think if there's anything I take away from the war, I think what we showed the people of Afghanistan is that there's a different way to approach things. And hopefully they remember that, right? Hopefully they take that and say, you know what, maybe we don't need to do it with all of the influence of everyone outside of us, but we can approach this from a different standpoint. We can have what we had before and allow people to live their lives, right? You know, maybe that's a potential. Maybe, you know, the Taliban is not the Taliban that we initially fought, you know, in 2001 and 2003. So maybe that will change
but there
things.
Again, lepers don't change their spots readily.
That's
and
true.
I think that the current bunch of Taliban, they got a few mouthpieces that making the right kind of noises, but the vast majority of them haven't changed. They're still clamping down on the locals. I've got Afghan friends that I speak to all the time. I've got a couple of guys that have just in the last few weeks managed to get themselves out of Afghanistan. They've got leave to come here. So we're working on getting them here. But the stories that they've told that what's still going on in Afghanistan is pretty horrific. The way that they're treating. If they find guys, the problem is that the Taliban took over and they've got all the biometric information that the government had on people, so they know who worked for us. They know who worked for foreigners, and they're actively seeking them out, and they are punishing them. And what they're doing to women in Afghanistan just it horrifies me. Really does.
That is one of the unfortunate things that, you know, however that mistake was made, you know, it certainly, you know, whoever's to blame, or maybe there's a lot of different people to blame, but that information should never have seen the light of day, you know, especially in a country like Afghanistan. That stuff should have been top secret information that we, you know, sanitized of sorts. And just, it's really unfortunate to see stuff like that kind of happen.
I think one of the toughest things to think about is that it was so unnecessary that the way it collapsed, the way it did. As far as I'm aware, America had around about 2,500 troops in there supporting the ANA with air power, and they just withdrew it. And without that air support, that air superiority, the ANA were fighting a losing battle, and that's how the Taliban was so easy, found it so easy to take over the country so quickly, and the chaos that was caused with the evacuation was just criminal. And I hold, Biden wholly responsible for it, but I also hold the other NATO countries that wouldn't stand up and support the UK to put up a few extra troops just to stay in there and provide that additional support to the ANA with the air cover, and that's the reason that it collapsed. We couldn't do it on our own at the time, unfortunately, else we would have done. I feel really bitter about the way it was conducted.
yeah, I don't disagree with, the blame put on Biden. But there's a lot of people that are involved in this decision like that,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And
I know Trump originally said that he was going to pull the troops out, but I believe that he would have pulled them out in a sustainable way that
right.
it wouldn't have created the chaos that it did.
Yeah, I think the whoever, and I certainly don't have. I was in sniper school when all this happened, so I was kind of out of the loop, and I didn't really at the time care because I wanted to pass sniper school. That was my priority. And I also have COVID at this time, so I'm like struggling through COVID at sniper school. It's 100 fucking degrees, and I'm dying. And so it wasn't on my mind, but wherever the decision was to strip down Bagram before Kabul was to me absolutely ridiculous. Like the like Bagram was the logistical hub that there's air support there. That is the the priority. Kaya is not going to be, that's the airport in Kabul is not going to be a sustainable air support hub for military operations. It's an international airport, so it's just not going to work. But that decision, on top of so many other decisions, there's so many people that need to be understood that there's blame to be had all over the place for the failures of Afghanistan. And it's quite unfortunate. We could Monday morning quarterback it all day, but the fact is we failed them, and in many ways we owe the people of Afghanistan an apology of sorts.
Absolutely.
A lot of people do, and I certainly, I don't even know, but I feel, I've had some interpreters reach out to me, and I've tried to help, some of them get out of Afghanistan. Some of them have, but a lot of their families haven't. And that's like the hard part of their families are stuck.
They have to leave the families behind, which is
it's tragic.
Which is another tragedy in itself.
Yeah.
But Bagram, I went up to Bagram a couple of times, and it was a horrible place. I thought it was just a dust bowl.
Yep, it's fishbowl.
Just that powdered dust that's everywhere. How you guys operated up there? I haven't got a Scooby.
I didn't want to, so I stayed there as little as possible.
Well, we had a little bit similar down in the Sangin Valley. During the winter, the mud down there, you wouldn't believe. Yeah, it's horrendous.
Most of my time, was, obviously Kunar province it's rock. It's all just that shale, that that nasty shale, and that's got its own issues, but it certainly wasn't that dust, right? It was just a different beast when you go to Bagram. But other than that, Kabul's a dust bowl, right? Bagram's centralized right in this big, literally surrounded by a ring of mountains that you can just all look at them. But Kabul itself is just a massive dust bowl. And it's, at the time in 2012, when I was there was 5 million people in a city meant for 2 million. Right.
Yeah.
And it was just,
did you ever, the road from Kabul to Bagram is an interesting road. You go over that pass and you see the mines laying at the side of the road, and the tanks up on the hill. Yep. They've all been blown to bits. And
it's such an interesting city.
Interesting.
Yeah. We were the Kabul QRF at the time in 2012. So the NATO QRF mission at the time. And we would drive all around the city, and it's just so interesting to see the culture, what people are living with. Yeah. It's just it gives you so much perspective on, when I'm sitting here in my home, which is, mostly wood, right? There's windows, there's doors, there's, I've got an air conditioning unit right outside, a heat unit, central air. I've got running water. And comparatively to most of Afghanistan and even most of Kabul, which is the most forward thinking city and the most, technologically advanced city, these people are running around with cell phones, but they have no running water, right? For some of these houses, they have
lots of power problems all the time.
The grid problems go down.
Time.
Yeah. And it's just remarkable that, most people don't have the understanding to look at that, for those of us who've been there and we look at that and we're like, we're very grateful. Like I'm incredibly grateful for the home I have right now, and the ability to look outside my window and see green, right? Like that's so wonderful, because for most of my time in Afghanistan, all I saw was tan, right? It was tan rocks, red rocks, like brown rocks, and maybe for 3 months out of the year, you saw green, right? You saw growing season. And it's just a different country. It's a different place, and it's a harsh place,
But fascinating.
Yeah, but fascinating. Absolutely.
If I had the opportunity to go there for a holiday, I would jump at it.
Yeah.
I loved Afghanistan. It's one of my favorite countries I've ever been to.
It is so beautiful.
So different. It's so different. And the culture there is amazing. And the people are incredible. How they survive the way they do is I mean, they are tough, proud people, and that's the only way to describe them.
Yeah, I agree.
But there you go. That's Afghanistan for you.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you in all this, I know how the U.S. Army has transitioned me back home, but you've been through, sounds like, so many different conflicts in so many different areas. What did the Army, and the British government and the people, how was your transition back to civilian life? What was that like? What were the challenges? Or was it nothing and you kind of figured it out? How did you kind of go through that process of being, a warrior on one hand, and then coming back home and recognizing I'm not going to do that anymore. Who do I become? What was that like for you?
Unlike the majority of guys that come or go into a conflict zone and come back from a conflict zone, my early days, I went in as a part of a formed unit. They didn't have back then. You didn't have the decompression systems that you have now. They didn't have the understanding that they do now of mental health issues, and I guess we didn't really. Do we have mental health issues? I don't think I did. I mean, there was one particular incident when I came back from Ireland in 1977, having been out there for I think it was 4 or 6 months tour. Was on leave. I was walking up the town with my mum. She's rabbiting away, and a car backfired, and I've taken cover. Quickly assessed the situation, thinking, you daft bugger. Got up, went and joined my mum again. She hadn't even noticed I'd gone. So back then, I mean, the skills and drills must have just kicked in automatically. I mean, take cover, down test, just assess the situation. Certainly on my last 7 operational tours, I went out, apart from the last 2, I went out as an augmentee, an individual augmentee. Coming back on every single operation, I missed going through the decompression. Normally what happens is you come back from, say, Afghanistan or Iraq, we stop off in Cyprus, you decompress, they give you beer and let you go and sit on the beach and get pissed for a couple of days, and then bring you back. And then you have an assessment that ask you, have you had any problems, any nightmares and all the rest of it? And of course, everybody says, no problem at all. Because, if you do say something,
right,
it's a stigma. You're then subjected to all sorts of stuff when you're not. I mean, there's a ways of dealing with it, and we are getting better at it with the trim process that happens when you're actually on the ground in operations. If you get a traumatic incident, what they do is 72 hours after the incident, a team will come in, they'll look at the incident, they'll assess everybody that was on it, anywhere connected to it, and they'll have a chat with people, work out how they're feeling at the time. They'll come back in 30 days later, do a reassessment to see if anything's changed, to let people know that it's not unusual to have the feelings that you might be feeling, etc., etc., etc. And then they'll do a follow-up 72 hours later. That's all well and good, and that does work. The problems you get is where you've got combat troops that are continually in conflict, where you've got incident after incident, you're losing people left, right, and Chelsea, and it's really difficult to manage those guys with their with what they've seen.
Yeah.
So and then trying to deal with it when they come back, because although they go through the trim process before, during, and after, it's not until a lot later that people start getting the symptoms, and even now, 40 years on, we're still getting veterans that are having problems from the Falklands War in 1982. So it affects people long term.
Yeah.
What they try and do and alleviate it is take them through this decompression, where they go through Cyprus and they go down the beach and they get pissed for a few days and talk about it and stuff like that. I missed all of those opportunities. Even coming back as the last 2 times as a formed unit, we missed it because of one reason or another. The flight we were on was a Kazakhstan flight and flew direct back to the UK. So we missed out all of that on one occasion, and the other occasion we came back as a different, we came back at different times. The way that we were doing the RIP, relief in place.
Yeah.
So again, I missed it. Then when I demobilised, I was asked, have I got any problems? Well, I didn't have any problems. I have a slightly different way of looking at it. I mean, yes, I've seen a huge amount of stuff in my time, from the days in Northern Ireland, days in Kosovo, the days in Afghanistan and Iraq. I've seen a lot of conflict. I've seen a lot of horror. But the way I look at it is that it was my job. Maybe it'll affect me in years to come, I don't know. But at the moment, it's compartmentalised, and it is part of the job. You're going to see that horror. So I've dealt with it. I don't have nightmares about it. Occasionally I think about some of the stuff I've done, especially talking to guys about it. But I think by talking about some of this stuff with guys that have been through the same sort of stuff, then it just, does it normalise it? It kind of makes it not a problem. It makes it something that is part of the job that you do.
Right.
So that's how I've dealt with it.
It's almost a preparation for it.
Yeah.
To be what it is.
And the other really funny part about it, I can go away on a 6-month tour. I can see all this stuff going on and one thing and another. And particularly with my previous wife, I mean, she died of cancer back in 2006. But all the tours that I'd done previous, I'll get home, walk through the door, and within 10 minutes, it'd be like I haven't left. There'd been no change. Other than the house had changed. I came back one time. I've been away for 6 months. I walked in the front door and I had to walk back out again, check that I've walked into the right house because the whole of the downstairs had changed. New kitchen, new bathroom, new stairs. What's she been doing while I've been away?
Yeah.
Remodeled the house. Yeah, so that was quite amusing.
Do you think that kind of reception of like bringing you back, I don't know if the like the family almost bringing you back into like you never left kind of thing was beneficial? Like, how do you think that affected your transition and your perspective, right? Obviously your perspective is so powerful in this situation where you have this preparation for, you know, that this is part of the job and this is a piece of it, and you have these conversations, but how much is the family life kind of welcoming you back home a part of it for you?
I think it's just the way that we were. I mean, we've been married for a lot of years, and I'd always been going away, and I came back and nothing had changed. We were the same people. Although I'd seen an awful lot, I didn't talk to her about it. She just accepted that it's what I did as a job, and I just dealt with it in my own way. So it was just that. I mean, I come back and it's just like 10 minutes through walking through the door, nothing's changed. Other than the house,
Yeah.
but our relationship hadn't changed. I mean, back in the early days, I mean, writing blueies, writing letters.
Yeah.
So you didn't have the communications that we have now, and particularly even back then, it was difficult. Prior to 2006, the communications wasn't as good as it is nowadays.
Yeah.
So occasionally you managed to get a phone call, but other than that, I mean, she just accepted the fact that it's what I did.
Right.
So yeah, we just got on with life, I suppose.
Yeah.
And the current Mrs. Heale, she's the same. So it's just like we do our own thing, but we do things together as well. And if I've been away, then when I come back, we just fall into how we were before, and it works for us.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's good. Yeah, I think that's, you know, and just the two different deployments I went on, you know, 2012 was kind of the advent of Facebook Messenger, right? And so there was communication there, but it wasn't a priority because nobody had Wi-Fi, you know. So
yeah,
Messenger was there. So when you could find Wi-Fi, you could message people. But where I was, there was no Wi-Fi, so you just didn't have the opportunity. And so the difference between that deployment in 2019 when I deployed to Afghanistan was I talked to my wife every day, right? We would video chat almost every day because we could. And it was just a vastly different experience, you know, like that the course of events could be followed, you know, and there could be, you know, for her, there was more worry, right? I would imagine is that you're learning more about, you know, you're able to see my responses. Like, so if I had a hard day, you could see that. And whether or not I told you what was happening, because I couldn't always, you know, there's a difference in how you approach the worry itself. But when I came back, it was very similar. It was, you know what, it's back to us, back to business as usual in the home. And there was moments of conversations that were, you know, how can we bring you back home in some ways? Because it was a little bit different, you know, especially 2012. Those conversations didn't exist, and that was the deployment I needed it, right? This last one, 2019, it's easy, right? It was like I think the most stressful thing that happened was my last mission, where I thought I was going to have to shoot a guy, but it never happened. And so that was the only stressful thing that really happened to me. But at that point in my life, I was able to express myself and talk about these things and not hold it in and not remain silent, because that was always the problem in 2012, you know? And so it's a different, you know, it's a different environment now, where I think leaders are more willing to expose that you're allowed to have problems, you know, and there's so much communication now, or instances for communication, opportunities for it, that it really makes it interesting to see like how your life has progressed through the military and you know, obviously to where you are now, but, and then also compare it to my experience, which is far more modern. Even through different militaries, I think it's still very, very similar. Because I've seen both ends of that, of like, you know, I've been punched by a drill sergeant before too. And, you know, that doesn't happen anymore. Not, at least not in our military, right?
Doesn't happen in ours either.
Right. And so that's, you know, it's a different world we kind of grew up in. And obviously yours was probably a lot worse than mine. I only got punched once in basic training, whereas who knows how many times, you know, you went through that. But
yeah, that kind of went on for quite a few years. I mean, you step out of line, there's two ways of dealing with it.
Right.
And it was always the sergeant's punishment or sergeant major's punishment that was the easiest one to take, because it hurt for a second and it left money in your pocket.
Yep.
And generally a clean slate as well.
Right. Your reputation remained clean. Absolutely. Of sorts. Yeah. It's interesting.
Just pick up on that you're on about the way things have changed. My last 8 years, from 2009 till 18, I was a welfare officer for London Central Garrison. So I was looking after pretty much, we had about 1,200 people on in the garrison that we looked after, a small welfare team. We had 3 companies of foot guards, and there was about 100, I think it was about 108 rank and file for each company. So we had the Nijmegen Company Grenadier Guards, number 7 Company Coldstream Guards, and F Company Scots Guards. Then we had the 5 foot guards bands, which is those 3, the Grenadiers, Coldstream, Scots, Irish and Welsh Guards bands that we looked after. We had the headquarters itself that we looked after. And we also picked up London District Headquarters that we looked after their welfare. So we had regular meetings with, there was a garrison conference that involved the garrison commander, the adjutant, the doctors, the dentists, the welfare team, and then all the department heads. So we'd have an open meeting start with, and then it broke down to individual units where they could come in and talk about individual soldiers. So we saw an awful lot of different problems come through, from medical problems to mental health problems to financial problems, to all sorts of problems that people have in modern day society.
Yeah.
And as a welfare team, we assisted with all of that. And it's probably tougher than being a sort of a fighter soldier, really, dealing with day in, day out people's problems.
Yep.
Just about everybody that comes through your door's got a problem, and you're the solution for it. And it does take its toll after a few years of I was ready to retire when I did.
Yeah.
It was a tough job, and I'd seen an awful lot. I mean, from combat days, this was, I mean, way over the top. This presented so many more problems than it did with the Taliban coming at you with an AK-47. That's for sure.
Fighting's easy, right?
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
It's the
It's
aftermath and the
dealing with
logistics of everything else that's
people's
hard part.
housing, people's problems with finance, people's relationship problems, people's mental health problems, people's health problems, and yeah, just a whole rafter. I mean, the young fellas that were coming into the companies, the foot guards companies, they come straight out of training, and they're doing their ceremonial training. So it was all about the whole existence for London Central Garrison is ceremonial. It's doing the Queen's Guards at Buckingham Palace, St James's Palace, the Tower of London, and Windsor Castle. So they mount guard, and there's a Queen's Guard is about 48 guides that are split up between the Tower, St James's, and Buckingham Palace, and then another, I think it's 12 guys that do the Windsor Guard. And they call it a guard, but they're there as a tourist attraction, basically.
Yep.
The police are actually doing the security on it.
Right. Yeah.
And then you've got the 5 foot guards bands, and they tend to be older people generally, and they come with a different set of issues. So, yeah, musicians tend to be a bit more lovey, and yeah. But I mean, we had some really, really good times. I mean, I took so many liberties, absolute liberties. I mean, particularly on the Queen's birthday parade, I managed to blag the job of looking after the minor royals in the general's office.
Awesome.
So we've got the likes of Prince Harry, Meghan were there one year. And then you've got the Gloucesters, the Kents, the Princess Catherine, who's going to be our queen one day,
Yeah.
Camilla, and the Yorks, and yeah, so it was a pretty special day, the Queen's birthday parade, and also the Festival of Remembrance in the Albert Hall. I don't know if you've ever seen that, where they got the Chelsea pensioners coming down the stage, and yeah, it's all emotional. So I managed to blag a duty on that, and that duty was fabulous because I just opened the curtain, close the curtain, open the curtain, close the curtain.
Yep.
And then I've done all the guards as the senior sergeant. So on the Tower of London, I've done the senior sergeant role, and the ceremony of the keys, and going for a drink in the Yeoman Warders Club after. Senior sergeant on the Buckingham Palace, and senior sergeant on the on St James's Palace and Windsor Castle. So it's a bit of a privilege to get involved with that side of life as well, and doing the fun bits and pieces. And then adventurous training. I arranged an awful lot of adventurous training for the guys. I'm a big sailor, and I'm a big telemark skier, so I'd take guys to the telemark championships in Austria for quite a few years, and it went over to France. So I took teams down there to compete up against the Royal Marines and some civvies and stuff like that. So it was the British telemark championships, and I came 6th in the army one year, so I was happy little lad.
Tim,
we used to take them sailing. I used to love taking the guys sailing, and also I set up a rugby team for them. So the London District Incremental Companies rugby team, the Old Dicks, we called them. So we played rugby as well.
Tim, I feel like if you don't have a book, you should, because the life that you have lived has so many twists and turns, and so many wise moments, so many things that I think people could take from. I just feel like we could talk for hours, and I don't, obviously, unfortunately, we both don't have hours. But
I've got my live stream tonight.
Right. Like you've got stuff going on. I've got stuff going on. it's just remarkable to kind of hear. I don't often go to, an hour and a half with people, but it does happen every once in a while. It's just fascinating to listen to your story and your life and all of this stuff. And if you haven't thought about a book, may I just kind of put it on the table for you? You let it stew for a little bit. You think about it.
I've got two books kind of in the pipeline.
Yeah.
One book is my life, and it's I've got it. What I've done is where I told my story, the 24 half-an-hour episodes. I've taken all the words and I've put them into Adobe InDesign, and I'm working my way through that. I'm correcting some of the English. I'm piecing together some more information in it as I go through. But it's a long old process to put that down. Then I've got this other book that I think the title is probably going to be The Life That Never Was. Now, I would have had an older brother. He was born on the 20th of December 1956. He died 16 hours later. But all through my life, I occasionally have a dream about what his life would have been, where I fitted into it, how we got on, and I'm trying to write that down because I can remember an awful lot of it, and these dreams I have is like us talking. It's that vivid. One of the last dreams I had was his son's wedding, and I was chauffeuring for him. I took the groom and the best man to the church, and then I took his son and the wife, the new his new wife to the reception. And what woke me up was the best man's speech and some of the stuff that he was coming out for. I woke up laughing, which was a shame because I wondered what happened after. But these dreams have been there pretty much all my life, on and off, about us, what he would have done with his life and how we were. So that's the other book that I've got going on. But with all these podcastings that I'm doing, the editing and all the rest of it, it's just taking time. So I'll get there with it eventually. And
I hope you do.
Yeah.
I really hope you do, because both of those books sound awesome. They sound wonderful.
They've got a lot of interaction to them.
Yeah. Well, Tim, again, I feel like we could talk for hours about this stuff, but alas, we've both got lives. So I'm gonna ask you the final question. You can take that where you want to, and then we're gonna close this episode out. But if there was one message you could leave the world, Tim, what would that be?
Live every day as though it's your last, because one day it will be.
That's it.
There you go. That's what I try and do.
I believe it.
Duck, dive, dodge, weave, and make it happen. Don't sit back and do nothing. You've got to take life by the horns and ride it. And you make your own life. Don't wait for somebody else to dictate to your life. If you want something, get out there and get it, and live every day as though it's your last, because one day it will be. And you don't want to turn up at the pearly gates and have regrets. I wish I'd done that. I wish I'd done that. And I didn't. It's only got yourself to blame if you didn't.
Thank you, Tim, for all of this. I always find it so humbling to listen to incredible stories like yourself, And I know you have a podcast that does the same, but I hope you know that you have an incredible story and that, you know, today you've made an impact on me, and I'm going to take what I've learned from you and hopefully share it with people, you know, hopefully
No,
give people.
thank you so much, Dylan, for having me on.
Absolutely.
I've enjoyed recollecting.
I love it. I love it. We'll have to do it again soon when you maybe get a little bit closer to that, finishing that book. I'd love to hear, honestly, I'd really love to hear the story of the second book. You know, I'd love to hear about those dreams and about this life. You know, I think that's
it's slowly coming together.
It's a beautiful kind of memorial to him.
Yeah. A life that never was.
I think that's wonderful. So
anyway, you're welcome to come on my live stream anytime.
I appreciate it.
Thirsty Thursday live stream from 7 till 9 every Thursday. That's British summertime or Greenwich Mean Time during the winter. And we talk about all sorts. We have specials, we have open forums, and I try and get special guests in, and we just like to have a bit of a giggle and a bit of a laugh and have some fun. So life's too short to be serious.
Absolutely. Well, Tim, I will certainly try to join you at some point. But until then,
message us and I'll ping you the link.
Yeah, absolutely. And until then, you take care of yourself, and for the people out there still listening, you take care of yourself. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll catch you next time on the Dylan Experience.
Yeah. Stay low, move fast, and watch where you put your feet.